David Carter had always been fascinated by the stars. As a child, he spent countless hours staring at the night sky, dreaming of the worlds beyond the twinkling lights. Now, as an experienced astronaut for the United Earth Federation, he was living that dream. He had been chosen for a solo deep space mission, a chance to explore further than any human had ever ventured. The mission was straightforward: chart unexplored planets and evaluate their potential for human colonization. It was a task that demanded skill, precision, and a good measure of bravery, qualities David had in abundance. Yet even the most skilled astronauts could not predict the uncertainties of space. Everything was going smoothly until the ship's navigation system began to malfunction. David's hands moved swiftly over the control panel, trying to stabilize the ship, but it was futile. The spacecraft was caught in the gravitational pull of an uncharted planet, and nothing he did could change its course. The ship was going down. As the planet's surface rushed toward him, David prepared for impact. The ship rattled violently as it pierced the planet's atmosphere, the heat shields barely holding up. Then, with a thunderous crash, it struck the ground, skidding across the terrain before finally coming to a stop. David took a moment to regain his composure, his heart racing. He had survived the crash, but now he was stranded on an unknown planet, millions of light years from home. He activated the ship's distress beacon, hoping that someone, somewhere, would pick up the signal. Yet deep down, he knew that rescue was unlikely. He was on his own. Stepping out of the wrecked ship, David was struck by the beauty of the world around him. The sky was a brilliant shade of purple, with two suns casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. Lush green vegetation covered the ground, and in the distance he saw mountains that seemed to reach the sky. It was a paradise, untouched by human hands. But as David explored the terrain, an uneasy feeling crept over him. He couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up and he turned around, scanning the area. There was nothing, only the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Still, the unease lingered. It wasn't long before David realized he was not alone on this planet. As he ventured deeper into the forest, he encountered a group of humanoid figures, partially hidden by the foliage. He approached them cautiously, his hand hovering over the laser pistol at his side. When the figures finally emerged, David's breath caught. They were women, extraordinarily beautiful, with long flowing hair and delicate features. They wore garments made of a shimmering material that clung to their lithe forms, and their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. For a moment, David was entranced by their beauty. But then he noticed something odd. There were no men, only women, all identical in their perfection. And the way they looked at him, it wasn't welcoming, it was cautious, almost hostile. David raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to harm you," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "My ship crashed. I'm just trying to survive." The women did not respond. Instead, they began to circle him, their eyes never leaving his face. David felt a chill run down his spine. He had encountered alien species before, but this felt different. There was something unsettling about their silence, the way they moved as one, as if they were connected by a single mind. Suddenly, one of the women stepped forward. She was taller than the others, with a commanding presence. Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, David felt as if she could see right through him. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice smooth and melodic, yet tinged with coldness. "This is not a place for your kind." David swallowed hard. "I don't mean to intrude, I just need help." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him. "We do not help outsiders, especially not males." David's heart sank at her words. He had heard of matriarchal societies, but this was something else entirely. The way she spoke, it was as if men were seen as a threat, an anomaly. I don't understand," David stammered. "Why do you reject men?" The woman's eyes narrowed. "Reject is a strong word. We do not reject, we simply do not need." Before David could respond, the woman raised her hand, and a bright light enveloped him. He felt his body grow heavy, his vision fading. The last thing he saw before everything went dark was the woman's cold, expressionless face. David awoke to the sensation of cool stone beneath him. His head throbbed, and his vision was blurry as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. The last thing he remembered was the alien woman's gaze and the flash of light. Now he was lying in what appeared to be a cell, its walls smooth, almost organic in design, with a faint luminescence that provided a soft glow. The air was cool and slightly perfumed, a far cry from the sterile, artificial atmosphere of his ship. As he sat up, his movements slow and deliberate due to lingering dizziness, David realized that he wasn't alone. Standing by the entrance of the cell was one of the alien women, different from the ones he had encountered in the forest. She had the same ethereal beauty and lithe form, but there was something softer, almost curious, in the way she observed him. "Where am I?" David croaked, his voice raspy from disuse. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she seemed to study him as though he were an animal in a zoo, something foreign and fascinating. "You are in the holding chambers of the Grand Nexus," she finally said, her voice clear and melodic, lacking the coldness he had encountered before. "You were found in a restricted area and brought here for evaluation." "Evaluation?" David echoed, trying to suppress the rising panic in his chest. "I'm not a threat. My ship crashed, and I just need help to repair it and leave." The woman tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "You are an anomaly," she said, as though that explained everything. "A male from another world. You are not meant to be here." David sighed, running a hand through his tangled hair. "I understand that, but I didn't come here on purpose. Please, if you could just help me fix my ship." "No." The firmness of her reply cut through his plea. "We do not aid males." There it was again, that disdain for his gender, as if his mere presence was offensive. David tried to keep his frustration in check. "Why? Why is it such a problem that I'm a man? What kind of society is this?" The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't quite decipher. "You ask questions that you should not ask. But you are different from what we expected. Our council will decide your fate soon." Before David could protest, the door to his cell slid open and two more women entered, both with the same cold, calculating expressions he had seen before. They gestured for him to follow, and with no other choice, he complied. As they led him through the corridors of the Grand Nexus, David couldn't help but marvel at the structure. The architecture was unlike anything he had seen before. Fluid, organic, as if the building had grown from the earth itself. The walls pulsed with a gentle light, and strange symbols, which he assumed were some form of writing, decorated the passageways. The women flanked him closely, their movements synchronized, as if they were of one mind. David kept silent, knowing that any attempt to speak would likely be ignored or met with the same cryptic responses. Instead, he focused on his surroundings, trying to gather as much information as possible. They finally arrived at a large chamber, its ceiling arched high above, adorned with intricate patterns that pulsed softly. In the center of the room stood a circular platform, and around it sat a group of women who were clearly the leaders, the council. Their presence was imposing, each one radiating authority and power. The woman who had spoken to David earlier took her place beside the others, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the platform. The silence in the room was palpable, broken only by the faint hum of energy that seemed to permeate the space. One of the council members, a tall, regal woman with silver hair that flowed like liquid metal, spoke first. "You are the male who has trespassed upon our world." David nodded, unsure if he was allowed to speak. The woman's gaze was piercing, and for a moment, he felt as if he was being judged by a force far greater than himself. "We have deliberated on your presence here," she continued. "Males are not permitted on Ednes. Your kind disrupts the balance we have cultivated for millennia." David couldn't hold back any longer. "I didn't mean to disrupt anything. My ship malfunctioned, and I had no control over where it landed. I'm just trying to survive and find a way back home." The council members exchanged glances, their expressions inscrutable. "Your presence is an anomaly," the silver-haired woman said, echoing the words of the other woman. Our society has evolved beyond the need for males. We are self-sufficient, and our reproductive technology has eliminated the necessity for mating. David was taken aback. But why? Why go to such lengths to remove men from your society? Another council member, with deep violet eyes that shimmered with intelligence, spoke up. Males are a source of conflict and instability. Our ancestors recognized this and sought to create a harmonious society, free from the chaos that comes with gender differences. Through advanced genetic engineering and biotechnological innovation, we achieved this goal. We have no need for men, nor do we desire their return. David's mind raced. He had heard of utopian societies, but this was something else entirely. A world where men were seen not as equals, but as obsolete. It was a concept that both fascinated and horrified him. "So what happens to me now?" he asked, his voice betraying his anxiety. The silver-haired woman regarded him with cool detachment. "You are a contaminant in our world. Your existence here threatens the equilibrium we have maintained for centuries. Generations. The council must decide whether to return you to your ship and allow you to leave or take other measures." David's heart pounded in his chest. "Other measures?" he repeated, a sinking feeling in his stomach. The woman did not elaborate, but her silence spoke volumes. David understood that his life hung in the balance, and the decision was not one that would be made lightly. The council members turned their attention away from David, conversing among themselves in a language he couldn't understand. Their voices were low, almost musical, but the tone was serious, and the atmosphere grew tense. David felt a cold sweat break out on his brow as he waited for their verdict. Finally, the silver-haired woman turned back to him. "You will be taken to a secure location while we deliberate further. Until then, you are not to leave the custody of our guardians." David was about to protest, to plead his case further, but the stern expressions of the council members silenced him. The two women who had escorted him earlier stepped forward, their hands gently but firmly guiding him out of the chamber. As they led him through the twisting corridor of the Nexus once more, David's thoughts were in turmoil. He was trapped on a planet where his very existence was considered a threat, and his fate was now in the hands of a society that had evolved far beyond anything he could comprehend. The possibility that he might never see Earth again loomed large in his mind, but he knew he couldn't give up hope. There had to be a way out, a way to survive. But how could he escape from a world that had no place for men? David had been placed in what appeared to be a spacious but isolated quarters. The room, like the rest of the Nexus, was a marvel of alien design, elegant, functional, and utterly foreign. The walls seemed to pulse with a gentle light, and the air was filled with a calming scent that he couldn't quite place. Despite the circumstances, there was an undeniable beauty to his surroundings, a testament to the advanced civilization that inhabited this planet. Days passed, though it was hard for David to tell how many. His cell, while comfortable, offered no windows or clocks to mark the passage of time. Food was delivered to him at regular intervals, strange yet nourishing meals that kept him healthy, but did little to quell his growing unease. He was alone with nothing but his thoughts and the occasional visit from the women who guarded him. It was during one of these visits that he first met Alara. She was different from the others, not just in appearance, but in demeanor as well. Where the other women had treated him with cold formality, Alara seemed genuinely curious, her bright green eyes studying him with an intensity that was both disarming and intriguing. "You are not like the others," she said during one of their first encounters, her voice carrying a hint of warmth that David hadn't heard in days. David, who had been staring out at the featureless wall, turned to face her. "I could say the same about you." Alara smiled, a small, hesitant smile that made her seem almost human. "I am curious," she admitted, sitting down across from him. "I have never seen a male before. I have read about your kind, of course, but to meet one in person, it is different." David couldn't help but chuckle, though there was little humor in it. "I suppose I'm something of a novelty here." Alara tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "You are an anomaly, yes, but I do not see you as a threat, as some of the others do. I find you fascinating." Her frankness caught David off guard. In the short time they had known each other, he had come to appreciate Alara's company. She was different from the other women he had encountered on this planet. While they treated him with a detached, almost clinical attitude, Alara was more open, more willing to engage with him on a personal level. It was a small comfort in an otherwise terrifying situation. "What is this place?" David asked one day, deciding to take advantage of Alara's willingness to talk. "I mean, I understand that it's some kind of advanced society, but how did it come to be this way?" Alara hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Our world, Ednus, has a long history. Many millennia ago, our ancestors were much like your kind. They lived in a society divided by gender, and it led to conflict, to war, to suffering. The leaders of that time saw the chaos and sought a solution. They believed that by eliminating the need for males, they could create a more harmonious society." David listened intently, trying to process what she was saying. "And so they... what? Engineered males out of existence?" Alara nodded. "It was a gradual process. Through advanced genetic manipulation, they created a race of women who could reproduce without the need for males. Over time, the male population dwindled until eventually there were none left. The knowledge of how to create and maintain our society was passed down through the generations, and we have continued to refine and perfect it." David shook his head in disbelief. "But what about love? What about the bonds that come from relationships between men and women?" Alara looked away, her expression unreadable. "Love, as you describe it, is not something that exists in our society. We have companionship, friendship, but the concept of romantic love is foreign to us." David felt a pang of sadness at her words. A society without love seemed empty, hollow. "But don't you ever wonder what you're missing?" Alara's eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite place. "I have wondered," she admitted softly. "There are times when I feel different from the others, as if there is something more, something I cannot grasp. But such thoughts are discouraged. We are taught that our way is the best way, the only way." David could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between what she had been taught and what she was beginning to feel. He knew that if he pushed too hard, he could alienate her, but he also knew that Alara might be his only ally on this planet. "What if there's another way?" he asked gently. "What if there's a way to have both, a peaceful society and the love that comes from being with someone who completes you?" Alara looked at him, her gaze intense. "I do not know," she whispered, "but I want to find out." Over the next few days, Alara and David grew closer. She would visit him more frequently, and their conversations became deeper, more personal. Alara was fascinated by David's stories of Earth, of the complexities of human relationships, and of the emotions that were so foreign to her. In turn, David learned more about the alien society. He learned about their advanced technology, their medical marvels, and their genetic engineering. The more he learned, the more he realized just how far removed this society was from anything he had ever known. It was both inspiring and terrifying. But as their bond grew, so did the danger. The other women began to notice Alara's frequent visits, and the council, ever watchful, began to suspect that something was amiss. David knew that their time was running out, that sooner or later the council would make their decision, and it wouldn't be in his favor. One night, as they sat together in his quarters, Alara spoke in a hushed tone, her voice trembling slightly. "The council is growing impatient. They are debating whether to allow you to return to your ship or terminate you." David's heart skipped a beat. "Terminate?" Alara nodded, her eyes filled with worry. "They see you as a contaminant, a threat to our society. If they believe that your presence could disrupt the balance we have created, they will not hesitate to eliminate you." David swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had to find a way out, and fast. "Is there any way I can convince them to let me go?" Alara shook her head. "The council is resolute. They believe that their way is the only way, and they will not tolerate anything that challenges that belief." David felt a surge of desperation. "Alara, you have to help me. You're the only one I can trust." Alara looked at him, her expression torn. "I want to help you, but if I am caught, they will punish me as well." David reached out, taking her hand in his. "I can't do this without you." For a moment, they sat in silence, their hands clasped together. Finally, Alara nodded, her resolve hardening. "There is a way," she said quietly. "There is a hidden ship, an ancient vessel from before the Great Purge. It's located in a remote part of the Nexus, forgotten by most. If we can reach it, we can use it to escape." David felt a glimmer of hope. "When can we go?" "Tomorrow," Alara said. "I will make the necessary preparations, but you must be ready. Once we start, there will be no turning back." David nodded, determination in his eyes. "I'm ready." As Alara left his quarters that night, David lay awake, his mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming escape. He knew the risks, knew that if they were caught, it would mean certain death. But he also knew that he couldn't stay here, trapped in a society that saw him as a threat simply because of his gender. He thought of Alara, of the bond they had formed, and a part of him wondered if they could ever find a place where they could be together, free from the constraints of her society. But such thoughts were dangerous, and he pushed them aside. For now, survival was all that mattered. The next day would determine his fate, and he would need all his strength and cunning to survive. As sleep finally claimed him, David's last thoughts were of Alara and the hope that together they could find a way to escape this forbidden Eden. David awoke with a sense of unease gnawing at him. Today was the day they would make their move. He wasn't sure how much time had passed. The passage of time since Alara had first told David about the hidden ship felt as though every second stretched to its breaking point. The anxiety of what was to come weighed heavily on him. When Alara arrived, her demeanor was tense but determined. She had changed from her usual flowing robes into something more practical, a sleek, form-fitting outfit that hinted at the kind of stealth and agility they would need. She handed David a similar garment, explaining that it was designed to blend in with the surroundings and mask their presence from the surveillance systems. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her voice a mixture of concern and resolve. David nodded. "I don't have a choice. We need to get out of here." Alara's eyes softened as she placed a hand on his arm. "We will make it, David. We have to." The two of them moved silently through the corridors of the Nexus, sticking to the shadows and avoiding the patrols that moved with eerie precision through the complex. The halls, which had once seemed alien and intimidating to David, now felt like a labyrinth of danger, each turn a potential trap. As they neared the ancient section of the Nexus where the forgotten ship was supposedly hidden, Alara began to share more of her thoughts. "I have always been different," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the energy that powered the Nexus. "I questioned things that others accepted without thought. I never understood why we were taught to fear and hate men when we had never even seen one." David glanced at her, seeing the conflict in her eyes. "What do you think now after meeting me?" Alara paused, her expression pensive. "I think there is more to life than what we have been told. I've learned more from you in these few days than I have in my entire existence. Emotions, love, even fear. These are things we were taught to suppress, to ignore. But I can't ignore them anymore. Not after meeting you." David felt a warmth spread through him at her words. Despite the circumstances, he couldn't help but feel a connection to Alara that went beyond mere friendship. She had risked everything to help him, and he knew that their bond was something special, something that transcended the differences between their species. They reached the entrance to the ancient section, a massive door that had been long forgotten by the inhabitants of the Nexus. Alara keyed in a sequence on the control panel, and the door slid open with a low rumble, revealing a dimly lit corridor that led deeper into the complex. "This way," she said, leading him down the corridor. As they walked, David couldn't help but notice the change in the environment. The walls here were older, worn, and the lighting was dimmer, casting long shadows that danced across the floor. There was a sense of abandonment, of something lost to time. Finally, they reached a large chamber, and there, in the center, sat the ancient ship. It was smaller than David had imagined, more of a shuttle than a full spacecraft, but it was clearly of advanced design, its sleek lines and mysterious symbols hinting at the technology it contained. Alara approached the ship's control panel, her fingers flying over the controls. "It's still functional," she said, relief evident in her voice, "but it will take a few minutes to power up." David nodded, his heart pounding as he kept watch at the entrance. Every second felt like an eternity as Alara worked to bring the ship online. The tension in the air was palpable, and David couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Just as the ship's engines began to hum to life, a warning alarm blared through the chamber. David's blood ran cold as he realized they had been discovered. "Alara, we need to go now," he shouted, rushing to the ship. Alara cursed under her breath as she activated the final sequence. "Get in!" she yelled, and David didn't need to be told twice. He leaped into the cockpit just as the doors of the chamber burst open, revealing a group of Nexus guards, their faces set in grim determination. The ship's doors closed just as the first shots were fired. The vessel shook as it took off, the energy shields barely holding against the onslaught. David strapped himself in as Alara navigated the ship through the twisting corridors of the Nexus, her hands steady on the controls despite the chaos around them. "We're almost there," Alara said through gritted teeth as the ship burst out of the Nexus and into the open sky. The purple hues of Ednus's twin suns bathed the landscape in an eerie glow as they shot toward the upper atmosphere. But the guards were not giving up. David could see several smaller craft in pursuit, their weapons firing relentlessly at the fleeing ship. "Can this thing outrun them?" David asked, fear creeping into his voice. Alara's face was set in determination. "It has to." She pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through the clouds and using the planet's terrain to their advantage, but the pursuers were relentless, closing in with every passing second. David's hands gripped the sides of his seat as the ship shook from the impact of another near miss. "Alara, we can't take much more of this." "I know," she snapped, her eyes darting between the controls and the rapidly approaching edge of the atmosphere. "Hold on." With a final burst of speed, the ship broke through the atmosphere and into the cold void of space. The sudden transition from the turbulent skies of Ednus to the silent expanse of space was jarring, but there was no time to celebrate. The enemy craft were still in pursuit, and they were gaining. Alara's fingers danced over the controls as she brought up the ship's navigation system. "There's an asteroid field not far from here. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them." David nodded, his mind racing as he considered their options. "Do it. We have no other choice." The ship veered toward the asteroid field, the massive rocks looming ahead like a deadly maze. Alara expertly guided the ship through the treacherous terrain, using the asteroids as cover. As they dodged and weaved between the massive space rocks, the pursuing craft were not as fortunate. One by one they were picked off by the asteroids, their pilots unable to match Alara's skill. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of their pursuers was destroyed, and they were alone in the silence of space. Alara let out a sigh of relief, her hands trembling slightly as she eased the ship into a more stable course. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. David unbuckled his seatbelt and moved to sit beside her. "We did," he agreed, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But what now? Where do we go from here?" Alara looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never been off Ednus before. I don't even know what's out there." David smiled reassuringly. "We'll figure it out together. There's a whole universe out there, and I have a feeling we're going to find a place where we belong." Alara nodded, her expression softening. "Thank you, David, for everything." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Thank you, Alara. I wouldn't have made it without you." They sat in silence for a moment, the vastness of space stretching out before them. Despite the uncertainty of their future, there was a sense of hope, of possibility. They had escaped the confines of Ednus, and now, together, they were free to explore the universe and discover what lay beyond. But even as they set a course for the unknown, David couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many mysteries left to unravel, and somewhere deep in the back of his mind, he knew that their escape from Ednus was only the beginning of a much larger adventure. The initial euphoria of their escape from Ednus quickly gave way to the harsh reality of their situation. The ancient ship, while advanced, was low on resources. It had enough power to keep them alive and moving for a while, but the supplies of food, water, and breathable air were limited. They needed to find a safe harbor, and soon. Alara spent much of her time at the ship's controls, scanning the surrounding star systems for any sign of a habitable planet or friendly outpost. David, on the other hand, used the ship's rudimentary database to study the star maps and familiarize himself with the unknown region of space they had entered. It was a far cry from the well-charted territories he had been trained to navigate, and the sheer vastness of the unexplored frontier was daunting. One day, after what felt like weeks of aimless drifting, the ship's sensors picked up a faint signal, a beacon of some kind originating from a nearby star system. The signal was weak and heavily distorted, but it was unmistakably artificial. "We have to check it out," David said, leaning over Alara's shoulder as she adjusted the ship's course. "It could be our only chance." Alara nodded, her face tight with concentration. "Agreed, but we need to be cautious. There's no telling what we'll find out there." As the ship drew closer to the source of the signal, the beacon's